Welcome back to Taxidermy Today's article of staining whitetail antlers, particularly Texas whitetails. My name is Erich Carter, and in the second video I'm going to show you how I stain colors up to make a really good Texas whitetail deer reproductions. Come follow me, I'll show you how I do it. First of all, you've got to start off by cleaning the reproductions with lacquer thinner. This takes all the fingerprints off and any oils that may be on the antlers, and it gives you a good surface to have the stain bond to. We're going to completely do the whole rack, and then we're going to come back and show you the colors I mix to get this whitetail looking really good. Okay, now we're ready to mix up our oil colors. We've already cleaned up the reproductions with lacquer thinner, and we're going to put on a thin wash coat base coat, which would be a nice coat to start with. It'll be a bonish brown color that we'll use. So here's how I do it. We're using tube oil paints, and we're mixing lacquer thinner and Japan dryer 50-50, which allows me to make light wash coat stains. And here's how I do it. I take a brush, I touch the Van Dyke brown, I drag it to the center, and I come back and I touch the raw sienna, which is the color I mix it with, just a tad bit of that, and then sometimes I'll come back and add a little bit more thinner if I want it a little more of a wash, and then I'll drag another brush over, a bigger, wider brush. This is an 1.5-inch brush, and now I'll apply it to the antler. And here's how I do it. I'll put this on, and I'm not really worried right now about drips or runs, because I'm going to wipe most of this off after the first coat's on. Now I basically have the whole first layer on, but a couple little tips I want to show you what to do here. One is I have a toothbrush that I use, and some of these knots and knurls and these antlers that have heavy bases, I come in and I scrub the color in, because sometimes it's hard getting the color on with a brush. But when you use a toothbrush, you can really scrub it in there and get all the knots and knurls and deep part of the antlers with color on there. Okay, I've almost got everything covered here, and I'll show you the next step that we have to do. Okay, hey, we've got the first coat on here, the base coat for the antlers, using the Van Dyke brown mixed with a little bit of raw sienna. But now I come back with a cloth, and I'm going to wipe off about 70% of this, 60% of this. It'll leave a nice stain color. This is still on here pretty wet, so what I do is I come back with a terry cloth towel, and you'll see the color will start coming off a little bit. You see it come off on the towel, and you see all the white knobs that are natural on a deer. But I come back and I do all this wiping to take off the excess color. Now we're going to put 2 or 3 more color coats on this, but you have to start with a base color to begin with. Now I'll wipe this all off, and we'll come back, and then we have to dry the first coat with a hair dryer, or you can set it over outside to dry or set it inside to dry overnight. But I'm going to speed dry this with a hair dryer, and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, now we've got our base color on here, and I've taken the rag and I've wiped off a lot of excess drips and whatnot, and I've taken a dry brush and I've wiped out a lot of the excess color. So now what we're going to do is a couple different things. One is, if I was doing a lot of these racks in a row, I would wait till overnight till I had a chance to put the secondary color on. You don't want to put a color on with a fresh color, because then the two colors will mix together. So you've got to dry the first coat first before you put any additional colors on. But I've got a trick for that. We're going to use a hair dryer, which is going to speed dry the very first coat. Then we'll come back on and put additional coats on to show you how it looks. Let's get this going. This will take a few minutes to completely dry the rack out, and then we'll come back and we'll show you how additional colors are applied. Okay, now we're going to start our second coat of colors, and what this is, it's more like a detailed coat. Now we've got a good base coat on the antlers, and we need to come in and darken a little bit around the bases and up and down the tines a little bit. But it's not a solid color, it's kind of a sporadic color that you'd see on antlers naturally. So if you come up close here, I'll show you how we mix this up. Again, these are stains, there's not a lot of paint going on. So I'll dip my brush in the 50-50 mixed Japan dryer and lacquer thinner. I'll get it in the middle. Now we're using three colors. We're using a little bit of Van Dyke brown, and we're using a little bit of raw umber. That just makes the brown a little bit darker. And sometimes if I get it too much, I'll go back to the Van Dyke brown to lighten it up. And then I use a hint of Payne's gray, which apparently it looks like it's black, but it's really not. It's a grayish color. And I'll mix this up, and I'll keep adding the thinner until I get as translucent as I want. Because these have to go on as a thin wash. Then I'll set this brush down. I'll grab a smaller brush, and I'll come back in. I'm going to paint, as you can see, on the paint inside the bases sporadically. Just like this. And I will go over the different parts of the rack until I get the detail of how I want. And I will come back and wipe a lot of this off so it doesn't look so dark, but you'll still see the detail. Okay, now that I have one detail coat on, I come back with a rag and I'll wipe off a lot of the excess that's on top of the ridges. You can see between the two sides how it leaves a darker stain down inside. And I'll do the same thing on the tines, and you want it random when you put that color on. You don't want it to be all one uniform color. Antlers are not like that. Okay, so as you can see, I've got darks, I've got lights, and that's very natural. And this terry cloth towel does help to blend the colors, and that's what we want. And the same thing on the back side, except the back side of the antlers on most deer are a lot lighter than the front side. So I'll come back and wipe these. You still have some darkness there. It's not all one color. Okay, now I'm going to come back and I'll do the opposite side. Okay, now you can see we've came back and put a darker detail coat on with a wash of the raw umber, Van Dyke brown, and a bit of the Payne's gray. And you can see it's darkened the rack a little bit, but you still see the highlights of where the deer is rubbed with all the knots and knurls, and of course the tips. You can see these are nice and white like a whitetail would have, and all the highlights are wiped off with the rag. So what we're going to do now is, before we put any more color on it, we're going to take the hair dryer and go over it again and get this paint and stain to set up. So let's give it a go. Okay, we've got the second coat on, and right now this will conclude the second video. We're going to come back and put the seal coat on in the third video. For now, go back, read the magazine, and come back and we'll finish things up. You'll see how this whitetail turns out.